When I heard those words come out of my daughter-in-law's mouth, I felt something inside me crack, like ice on a frozen pond. We didn't invite you to the wedding. It was for important guests only. Important guests. I stood there in my own kitchen, holding the phone so tight my knuckles went white, listening to Jessica explain why I wasn't worthy of witnessing my only son, Marcus, marry the woman he claimed to love. For 3 years, I had opened my heart and my wallet to this girl. 3 years of treating her like the daughter I never had. 3 years of believing that love and generosity would build the foundation for a beautiful family relationship. I remember the exact moment I first met Jessica. Marcus brought her to Sunday dinner, nervous as a cat in a thunderstorm, stumbling over his words as he introduced her. She was polite, charming even, with that sweet smile that could melt butter on a cold day. She complimented my cornbread, asked about my garden, and listened attentively when I told stories about Marcus as a little boy. By the end of that evening, I was already planning how I could help them build their life together. If only I had known then what I know now. The signs were always there, weren't they? The way she would call me, Mom Sarah, with such practiced sweetness, like she was reading from a script. The way her eyes would light up whenever I mentioned helping them with expenses, but grow distant when I suggested spending time together without money being involved. The way she would cancel our lunch dates, but never miss an opportunity to ask for financial assistance. But love makes you blind to red flags. And I was so desperate to have a daughter that I painted those red flags any color but the truth. Over those 3 years, I calculated later, I had given them nearly $40,000. $40,000 from my retirement savings, from the nest egg my late husband Robert had worked so hard to build for our golden years. Down payments for their apartment, furniture for their living room, Jessica's car repairs, Marcus's student loans, emergency medical bills, and countless other expenses that somehow always found their way to my doorstep. Every time they called with another crisis, I would rush to help, believing that this was what families did for each other. I paid for Jessica's bridesmaid dress when her sister got married. I covered their rent when Marcus was between jobs. I bought groceries when their refrigerator was empty and funded their weekend getaways when they needed to relax. Each time, they promised it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. Each time, I believed them because I wanted to believe that my generosity was building something beautiful, something lasting. The wedding planning had been going on for months, and I was so excited to be part of it all. I had already picked out my dress, a beautiful navy blue number that I thought would photograph well. I had offered to help with the catering costs, the flowers, anything they needed to make their special day perfect. Jessica would call me with updates about the venue, the guest list, the menu choices, always making me feel included in every decision. I thought I was going to be the proud mother-in-law, standing beside my son as he married the woman he loved. Then came that phone call on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was watering my roses in the backyard, humming an old gospel song, when the phone rang inside the house. I hurried to answer it, thinking maybe it was Jessica calling with more wedding details, or Marcus wanting to chat about his day at work. Instead, I heard Jessica's voice, but it was different somehow, cooler, more detached than usual. "Mom Sarah," she said, and even the way she said my name felt wrong. "I need to tell you something about the wedding." My heart started beating faster, thinking maybe they were moving the date or changing the venue. Maybe they needed more money for something unexpected. I was already mentally going through my savings account, figuring out what I could contribute. "What is it, honey?" I asked, settling into my favorite chair by the window. Well, we've decided to keep the wedding very small and intimate. We're only inviting the most important people in our lives. You understand. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I still didn't quite grasp what she was saying. Of course, dear. Small weddings can be so much more meaningful. When do you need me to be there for photos? I asked, still not understanding. The silence on the other end of the line stretched on for what felt like forever. Then came the words that would change everything between us. Forever. Mom, Sarah, I think you misunderstood. We didn't invite you to the wedding. It was for important guests only. Important guests only. The words echoed in my head like a broken record. I, who had financially supported them for 3 years, was not considered an important guest at my own son's wedding. I, who had treated Jessica like my own daughter, who had welcomed her into my home and my heart, was not important enough to witness the most significant day of my son's life. I don't understand, I managed to whisper, though my throat felt like it was closing up. What do you mean, I'm not invited? Jessica's voice remained steady, almost businesslike. We wanted to keep it really intimate, just immediate family and our closest friends. You understand, don't you? It's not personal. Not personal. How could excluding your son's mother from his wedding not be personal? How could 3 years of love, support, and financial assistance not earn you a seat at the most important celebration of his life? I felt like I was drowning in confusion and hurt, struggling to make sense of what I was hearing. Can I speak to Marcus? I asked, hoping my son would explain that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. He's not here right now, Jessica replied quickly, but he agrees with me about keeping the guest list small. I hope you understand, Mom Sarah. We'll call you after the honeymoon and tell you all about it. After I hung up the phone, I sat in that chair for hours, staring out at my rose garden without really seeing it. The flowers I had planted with such care, the same care I had given to my relationship with Jessica and Marcus, suddenly looked wilted and neglected. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my heart, leaving nothing but a hollow ache where my love for them used to live. That night, I called my sister Dorothy in Atlanta, the only person I could trust with this kind of pain. Dorothy had always been the practical one, the sister who saw through people's nonsense when I was too kind-hearted to notice. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything, from the 3 years of financial support to the devastating phone call. Sarah, she said when I finished, her voice gentle but firm, that girl has been using you from day one, and now that she's got what she wanted, she's showing you her true colors. I wanted to argue with her, to defend Jessica and Marcus, to believe that this was all just a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a simple conversation. But deep down, I knew Dorothy was right. The evidence had been there all along, and I had chosen to ignore it because I so desperately wanted to believe in the goodness of people I loved. The wedding took place on a Saturday in May, a beautiful spring day that should have been filled with joy and celebration for our family. Instead, I spent it alone in my house, looking at the navy blue dress hanging in my closet, tags still attached, mocking me with its unworn elegance. I tried to keep busy, cleaning rooms that were already spotless, cooking meals I had no appetite to eat, anything to keep my mind off the fact that my son was getting married and I wasn't there to witness it. Social media made it impossible to completely avoid the wedding. Friends and relatives kept sending me pictures they had seen online. Pictures of Marcus looking handsome in his black tuxedo, Jessica radiant in a white dress that I had helped pay for with the money I gave them for wedding expenses. I saw Jessica's parents beaming with pride as they posed with the happy couple. I saw her siblings raising toasts with champagne glasses, celebrating the union of two people I had loved and supported for years. But what hurt the most was seeing how happy they all looked without me there. The wedding was beautiful, elegant, and perfectly executed, and my absence hadn't diminished their joy one bit. I realized then that I had been fooling myself about my importance in their lives. I was nothing more than a financial convenience, an ATM with emotions that they could access whenever they needed extra cash. The week after the wedding was the longest week of my life. I kept expecting a call from Marcus, an apology, an explanation, something to help me make sense of what had happened. I thought maybe he would realize how much he had hurt me and want to make things right. I imagined him showing up at my door with flowers, telling me that excluding me had been Jessica's idea and that he regretted going along with it. But the call never came. The apology never materialized. The flowers never appeared on my doorstep. Instead, I was left to deal with the crushing reality that my son and daughter-in-law had deliberately chosen to exclude me from one of the most important days of their lives, despite everything I had done for them over the past 3 years. I started going through my financial records during that painful week, adding up every dollar I had given them since they started dating. The total was staggering, more money than I had ever spent on anything except my house. Money I had withdrawn from my retirement accounts, thinking I was investing in my family's future. Money I had given freely and gladly, never asking for repayment because I believed we were building something beautiful together. I spent hours staring at those numbers, feeling more foolish with each calculation. $40,000. Enough to take that European cruise I had always dreamed about with Robert before he passed. Enough to renovate my kitchen or put a new roof on the house. Instead, I had handed it over to two people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient source of funding for their lifestyle. The silence from Marcus was the most painful part of all. This was the little boy I had raised alone after his father died when he was 12. The child I had worked double shifts to support, staying up late to help with homework, cheering from the sidelines at every baseball game and school play. The young man I had been so proud of when he graduated college, when he got his first real job, when he told me he had found someone he wanted to marry. Where was that son now? Had Jessica's influence completely erased the values I thought I had instilled in him? Or had I been blind to his true character all along, seeing only what I wanted to see, because loving him was easier than accepting that I had somehow failed as a mother? I tried calling him 3 times that week, but each call went straight to voicemail. His recorded voice, cheerful and familiar, felt like salt in an open wound. "Hey, you've reached Marcus. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." But he never did get back to me. Not that day, not the next, not ever. By Thursday, I had made a decision that surprised even me. I was done chasing after people who clearly didn't want me in their lives. If being excluded from their wedding wasn't message enough, then their silence afterward certainly was. I had spent 68 years on this earth, learning hard lessons about dignity and self-respect. And I wasn't going to throw those lessons away for anyone, not even my own son. I changed my phone number that Friday afternoon. It felt strange, almost rebellious, sitting in the phone company office, filling out the paperwork to disconnect the number I had held for 15 years. The young clerk looked at me curiously when I insisted on an unlisted number, but I didn't offer any explanation. Some decisions don't require justification, especially when they're about protecting your own peace of mind. The weekend passed quietly. and for the first time in months, I felt something resembling peace. No phone calls asking for money. No text messages about emergencies that somehow always required my immediate financial attention. No fake sweet conversations that left me feeling drained and used. Just silence. And slowly, I began to remember what my life had been like before Marcus brought Jessica home. I started small, doing things I had given up during those 3 years of constant financial crisis management. I bought myself fresh flowers for the kitchen table, something I used to do every week before their needs became more important than my simple pleasures. I made my favorite lemon pound cake, the one Robert always said was better than anything from the fancy bakery downtown. I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee and actually finished reading the entire newspaper without being interrupted by requests for help. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door around 10 o'clock, holding a covered dish and wearing the concerned expression she reserved for serious conversations. "Sarah, honey," she said as I invited her in. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you all right? I noticed you seemed a little down lately, and then I saw that beautiful dress hanging on your clothesline with the tags still on it." I had put the navy blue wedding dress outside to air out, thinking maybe I could return it to the store. Seeing it hanging there in the morning sun, unworn and unnecessary, had felt like a small act of rebellion against the hurt that had been consuming me. Mrs. Patterson was one of those neighbors who noticed everything, but usually minded her own business. So her concern touched me more than I expected. Before I knew it, I was telling her the whole story. From Jessica's sweet beginnings to the devastating phone call to the wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. "That child has some nerve," Mrs. Patterson said when I finished, shaking her head in disbelief. "After everything you did for them, treating you like you don't matter. Sarah, honey, you're better off without that kind of poison in your life." Her words were exactly what I needed to hear. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to validate what your heart already knows. Mrs. Patterson stayed for lunch, and we talked about everything except Marcus and Jessica. We talked about her grandchildren in Chicago, about the new pastor at church, about the community garden project the city was planning for the empty lot on Maple Street. It felt good to have a conversation that didn't revolve around someone else's problems or financial needs. It felt good to be seen as Sarah the person, not Sarah the wallet. Mrs. Patterson reminded me of who I had been before I got lost in trying to buy love and acceptance from people who were never going to give it freely. That afternoon, I made another decision. I was going to reclaim my life completely, not just change my phone number and hope for the best. I was going to fill the empty spaces that Marcus and Jessica had left behind with things and people who actually valued my presence, not just my bank account. I called my sister Dorothy and told her about my new phone number, about my decision to step back from the situation entirely. She was quiet for a long moment, then said something that stayed with me for days afterward. "Sarah, you've been grieving the loss of people who were never really there in the first place. Jessica never loved you. And Marcus? Well, Marcus chose his wife over his mother. That tells you everything you need to know about both of them. Now, you get to choose yourself for a change." Choosing myself felt foreign at first, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit right. I had spent so many years defining myself through my relationships with other people, first as Robert's wife, then as Marcus's mother, then as Jessica's bonus mom. Being just Sarah, responsible only for my own happiness and well-being, was going to take some getting used to. I started by cleaning out Marcus's old bedroom, something I had been putting off for years. The room had become a shrine to my son's childhood, with his high school trophies still on the shelves and his old baseball posters covering the walls. I packed everything carefully into boxes, not out of anger, but out of acceptance that this chapter of my life was officially over. The room felt bigger once I removed all those memories. I stood in the doorway, looking at the empty space, and saw possibility instead of loss. Maybe I would turn it into a craft room, or a library, or just a quiet place to sit and read without being surrounded by reminders of disappointment. Tuesday morning brought something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: complete quiet. No phone calls, no text messages, no sudden emergencies requiring my immediate attention and financial assistance. I made my coffee, read my devotional, and planned my day around activities that brought me joy instead of stress. I decided to visit the community center, where I used to volunteer, before Marcus and Jessica's constant needs took over my schedule. The director, Miss Williams, was delighted to see me and immediately asked if I was ready to come back to the literacy program. "Sarah, we have missed you so much," she said, giving me a warm hug that felt like coming home. "The new volunteers are wonderful, but they don't have your patience with the adult learners. When can you start again?" Walking through those familiar halls, seeing the classrooms where I had helped dozens of adults learn to read and write, reminded me of who I was beyond my family relationships. I was a teacher, a mentor, a woman who had something valuable to offer the world that had nothing to do with money. That evening, I sat down with a notebook and made a list of all the things I wanted to do with my life, now that I was free from the constant financial drain of supporting ungrateful adults. The list surprised me with its length and variety. Travel to visit Dorothy in Atlanta, take that painting class I had been putting off, volunteer more at the community center, join the church choir again, plant a bigger vegetable garden, learn to play the piano. For the first time in 3 years, I felt excited about my future, instead of anxious about the next crisis I would be asked to solve with my checkbook. I felt like myself again, like the strong, independent woman Robert had fallen in love with all those years ago. Wednesday passed peacefully, and Thursday brought another surprise. I was working in my garden, finally giving my roses the attention they deserved, when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. My heart jumped for a moment, thinking maybe Marcus had come to apologize. But when I looked up, I saw a young woman I didn't recognize walking toward my front door. She was crying, mascara streaking down her cheeks, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. Something about her desperate posture reminded me of Jessica during one of her many manufactured crises, and I felt my guard go up immediately. I watched through my kitchen window as the young woman approached my front door, her shoulders shaking with what looked like genuine distress. But after 3 years of Jessica's theatrical performances, I had learned to recognize the difference between real tears and calculated manipulation. This girl had that same desperate energy Jessica used to bring to my doorstep whenever she needed something. The doorbell rang twice in quick succession, followed by frantic knocking. I dried my hands on my apron and walked slowly to the door, taking my time because rushing to solve other people's problems was a habit I was determined to break. Through the peephole, I could see her more clearly now. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with Jessica's same practiced look of helplessness. "Mrs. Williams?" she called out, her voice muffled by the door. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I really need to talk to someone. My friend Jessica, said you might be able to help me. Jessica, of course, even from whatever honeymoon destination my money had helped finance. She was still finding ways to send people to my door with their hands out. I stood there for a long moment, watching this stranger cry on my front porch, and felt something harden inside me, like cement setting in the sun. I opened the door just wide enough to see her face clearly. "I'm sorry, but you must have the wrong house. I don't help Jessica's friends anymore." The girl's eyes widened in surprise, as if she hadn't expected resistance. "But Jessica said you were like family to her, that you always helped when people were in trouble. I'm really desperate, Mrs. Williams. My car broke down, and I have to get to work tomorrow, or I'll lose my job." The script was so familiar, it was almost laughable. The sudden emergency, the threat of job loss, the appeal to my relationship with Jessica. I wondered how many other people Jessica had sent my way over the years, people I had probably helped without ever knowing they were part of her wider network of manipulation. "Jessica and I are no longer in contact," I said firmly. "I suggest you call someone else for help with your car troubles." I started to close the door, but she put her hand against it, desperation making her bold. "Please, Mrs. Williams. Jessica told me you were the kindest person she knew, that you understood what it was like to struggle. I just need a few $100s for the repair. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my next paycheck. A few $100s. Such a small amount compared to the thousands I had given Marcus and Jessica over the years. But it represented something much larger. It represented the assumption that my kindness was weakness, that my generosity was endless, that I existed solely to solve other people's financial problems. "Young lady," I said, my voice steady and calm, "I understand you're in a difficult situation, but I'm not a bank, and I'm not a charity. Jessica was mistaken if she told you I was someone who handed out money to strangers." The tears stopped as quickly as they had started, replaced by a flash of anger that told me everything I needed to know about this girl's true character. "But Jessica said you gave them thousands of dollars over the years. She said you were always there when they needed help." So Jessica had been bragging about how easy it was to get money from the old lady. She had been sharing details of my generosity with her friends, probably painting me as a soft touch who could be counted on to open her wallet for any sob story. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, but it also strengthened my resolve. "What Jessica told you about the past is irrelevant," I replied. "I'm not that person anymore, and I don't owe explanations to strangers who show up at my door asking for handouts." I closed the door firmly and turned the deadbolt, listening as the girl's footsteps retreated down my walkway. Through the window, I watched her get into a car that looked perfectly functional to me, not broken down at all. She sat there for several minutes, probably calling Jessica to report that the Easy Mark had suddenly developed a backbone. That evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. If Jessica was already sending people to my door asking for money, it meant she had no intention of letting me fade quietly out of their lives. She saw me as a resource that belonged to her, something she could access whenever needed, regardless of how she had treated me. I called Dorothy again, needing to talk through what had happened. My sister listened patiently as I described the encounter with Jessica's friend, then let out a long sigh. "Sarah, honey, that girl is going to keep sending people your way until you make it crystal clear that the bank is permanently closed. She's testing you, seeing if you'll cave under pressure from different angles. But what if some of these people really are in trouble?" I asked, the old familiar guilt creeping back in. Sarah, listen to yourself. You're worried about helping strangers that a woman who excluded you from her wedding is sending to your door. That's not kindness. That's being a doormat with a welcome sign painted on your back. Dorothy was right, as usual. I had spent so many years confusing kindness with being used that I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Real kindness came from choice, not manipulation. Real generosity flowed from love, not from fear of being unloved. Friday morning brought a phone call to my new number, which surprised me, since only a handful of people had it. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. "Mom, Sarah, it's me, Jessica." Her voice had that same sweet tone she used to use when she needed money, but there was an edge to it now, a hint of frustration that she was trying to hide. "How did you get this number?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that we need to talk. Marcus and I are back from our honeymoon, and we heard you changed your phone number without telling us. We're concerned about you." Concerned. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. They were concerned about their access to my bank account, not about my well-being. "I'm fine, Jessica. I changed my number because I needed some peace and quiet." "Peace and quiet from your own family?" Her voice had a sharp edge now, the mask slipping slightly. "Mom, Sarah, I know you were hurt about the wedding, but you have to understand our position. We wanted something intimate and special." Special. There was that word again, the one that had started this whole nightmare. I was not special enough to attend their wedding, but apparently I was special enough to fund their lifestyle indefinitely. "Jessica, I understand your position perfectly," I said, keeping my voice level. "You made it very clear where I stand in your lives. I'm simply accepting that reality and moving forward accordingly." "What does that mean exactly?" The sweetness was completely gone from her voice now, replaced by something that sounded almost threatening. "It means I'm no longer available to solve your financial problems. It means I'm living my own life instead of funding yours. It means you'll need to find other sources of income besides my retirement savings." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold as winter morning. "Fine, be that way. But don't expect us to come running when you're old and alone and need someone to take care of you." The threat was clear, and it revealed everything I needed to know about Jessica's true feelings toward me. In her mind, my value was purely transactional. I paid for things, and in return, I got to feel like part of their family. Now that I was refusing to pay, the illusion of family was being stripped away entirely. "Jessica, I'd rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by people who only love my money," I replied. "Give my regards to Marcus." I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, shaking not from fear, but from anger. The audacity of this girl to threaten me with abandonment after she had already abandoned me emotionally was breathtaking. She was angry that I wouldn't continue to fund their lifestyle, and she was making it clear that their affection had always been conditional on my financial contributions. That weekend, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. I was going to start living like the strong, independent woman I had been before Marcus brought Jessica into our lives. I was going to fill my days with activities that brought me joy instead of stress, with people who valued my company instead of my checkbook. I started by calling the church to ask about rejoining the choir. Sister Matthews, the choir director, was overjoyed to hear from me and immediately invited me to Wednesday night practice. I had forgotten how much I loved singing, how the music used to lift my spirits and connect me with something larger than my everyday worries. Next, I called the community college to ask about their senior citizen programs. They had art classes, computer courses, even a travel club that took day trips to interesting places around the state. The woman on the phone was so enthusiastic about their offerings that I signed up for 3 different activities before I hung up. For the first time in years, I had things to look forward to that had nothing to do with other people's emergencies. I had commitments that mattered to me, activities that would challenge me to grow instead of just giving constantly to others. Monday brought another test of my resolve. I was getting ready to leave for my first art class when the phone rang. This time, it was Marcus himself, and hearing his voice after weeks of silence hit me harder than I expected. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, without any greeting or acknowledgement of how long it had been since we'd spoken. "Hello, Marcus. How was your honeymoon?" I asked, determined to maintain some semblance of normal conversation. "It was fine. Look, Mom, Jessica told me about your conversation with her, and I think you're being unreasonable. We're family, and family helps each other out. Family." The word that had once meant everything to me now felt hollow and manipulative coming from his mouth. "Marcus, when exactly did I stop being family to you? Was it when you decided I wasn't important enough to attend your wedding?" "Mom, that's not fair. The wedding was Jessica's decision, and she wanted to keep it small. You're taking this way too personally. The wedding was Jessica's decision. Not their decision, not even his decision, but Jessica's, alone. My own son was hiding behind his wife's choices instead of taking responsibility for excluding his mother from the most important day of his life. "Marcus, do you even remember who paid for that wedding?" I asked quietly. The silence told me he did remember, and that he was uncomfortable being reminded of it. When he finally spoke, his voice was defensive. "You offered to help with the expenses, Mom. We didn't force you to do anything." "You're right, I offered. Just like I offered to help with your rent, your car payments, your student loans, your furniture, your groceries, and everything else over the past 3 years. I offered because I loved you and wanted to help you build a good life. But love is supposed to be a two-way street, Marcus. It is a two-way street. We love you too, Mom. Do you? When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited without needing money? When was the last time you included me in your plans instead of just your problems?" Another long silence. I could hear him struggling to find an answer that would make him sound less selfish than he actually was. Finally, he gave up trying to defend himself and went straight to what he really wanted. "Mom, we're in trouble. The rent is overdue, and if we don't pay it by Friday, we're going to get evicted. We need your help." There it was. Not an apology for excluding me from their wedding. Not an acknowledgement of how badly they had treated me. Just another request for money, as if nothing had changed between us except my phone number. "Marcus, I'm curious about something," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "When you and Jessica were planning your guest list, did it occur to either of you that the person who had been supporting you financially for 3 years might want to be there?" "Mom, please don't make this about the wedding again. We need to focus on the rent situation." "The rent situation. Yes, let's talk about that. How much do you owe?" $1,800. I know it sounds like a lot, but $1,800 that you don't have because you spent your money on a honeymoon instead of paying your bills? The honeymoon was important, Mom. It was our time to bond as a married couple. And where did the money for this important honeymoon come from, Marcus? Another silence. We both knew the answer, The honeymoon had been funded by money I had given them for wedding expenses, money they had diverted to their romantic getaway instead of using it for its intended purpose. Marcus, I said gently, I want you to think very carefully about what you're asking me to do. You excluded me from your wedding because I wasn't important enough to be there. You went weeks without calling to see if I was okay. You let your wife threaten me with abandonment when I stopped sending money. And now you want me to bail you out of a financial crisis that exists because you chose a honeymoon over paying rent. Mom, please. We're desperate. Where else can we turn? I have a suggestion, I said, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. Why don't you ask your important guests for help? The people who were special enough to attend your wedding surely care enough about you to help with your rent. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told me my words had hit their target. For the first time in this conversation, Marcus seemed to understand the connection between his choices and their consequences. Mom, that's not fair. You know we can't ask Jessica's parents for money. Why not? They were important enough to be at your wedding. Surely they're important enough to help with your rent. It's different with them. They don't have the kind of money you have. Marcus, let me tell you what's different. Jessica's parents have never given you $40,000 over 3 years, so they haven't earned the right to be treated like an ATM. But more importantly, they probably wouldn't exclude you from family events while still expecting you to pay their bills. $40,000? His voice was small now, like he was finally understanding the magnitude of what I had given them. $40,000, Marcus. That's what I calculated after your wedding, when I was trying to figure out how I had spent so much money on people who didn't think I was important enough to witness their marriage. The silence stretched between us, like a chasm that had been years in the making. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel him struggling with the reality of what his choices had cost both of us. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller somehow. Mom, I didn't know it was that much. You didn't know because you never asked. You just took whatever I offered and assumed there would always be more. You never wondered if I was spending my retirement savings on you. You never asked if I could afford to keep giving you money. You just expected it to continue forever. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. But we still need help with the rent. Can't we work something out? And there it was again. The assumption that an apology would magically restore access to my bank account. That saying sorry would erase the hurt of being excluded from his wedding and open the door to continued financial support. Marcus, I'm going to give you some advice that I wish someone had given me 3 years ago. You and Jessica are adults. Adult problems require adult solutions. Figure it out yourselves. But Mom, Marcus, I love you. I will always love you because you're my son. But I'm done being your financial safety net. I'm done being someone you turn to only when you need money. I'm done being treated like I don't matter, except when there's a bill to pay. What are we supposed to do? The same thing every other married couple does when they can't pay their rent. Get second jobs. Move to a cheaper place. Ask for help from the important people in your lives. Figure it out together, like the adults you are. I could hear Jessica's voice in the background, sharp and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. Marcus was covering the phone, having a whispered argument with his wife about something. When he came back to the conversation, his tone had changed completely. Fine, Mom. If that's how you want it, then that's how it'll be. But don't expect us to be there for you when you're old and need help. The same threat Jessica had made, delivered in my own son's voice. It was like hearing a stranger speak with familiar words, and it broke something inside me that I hadn't even realized was still whole. Marcus, I stopped expecting things from you the day you told me I wasn't important enough to attend your wedding. Goodbye. I hung up the phone and sat in my quiet kitchen, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief that I no longer had to pretend this relationship was something it wasn't. I no longer had to hope that my generosity would eventually be rewarded with genuine love and respect. I no longer had to wonder when the next crisis would require my immediate financial attention. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt truly free. The days that followed that final conversation with Marcus felt different somehow. Not painful like I expected, but strangely peaceful, like the calm that settles over a house after a long storm finally passes. I had been carrying the weight of their expectations for so long that I forgot what it felt like to wake up without wondering which crisis would require my attention that day. I threw myself into the activities I had signed up for with an enthusiasm that surprised even me. The art class at the community college became my sanctuary every Tuesday and Thursday morning. There's something healing about watching colors blend on canvas, about creating something beautiful with your own hands, instead of just solving problems with your checkbook. Mrs. Chen, our instructor, was a tiny woman with paint-stained fingers and the biggest smile I'd seen in years. "Sarah, you have natural talent," she told me after my third class, examining the landscape I had painted from memory of Robert's favorite fishing spot. "Have you ever considered displaying your work?" The idea of anyone wanting to see my paintings felt foreign after years of having my contributions dismissed and taken for granted. But Mrs. Chen's genuine enthusiasm planted a seed of possibility that I hadn't felt in decades. Maybe I did have value beyond my bank account. Maybe I could create things that mattered to people who actually appreciated effort and beauty. The choir practice on Wednesday evenings became another bright spot in my week. Sister Matthews had placed me with the altos, and my voice blended perfectly with the other women who had been singing together for years. They welcomed me back like I had never left, asking about my health and my garden, genuinely interested in my answers instead of looking for openings to ask for favors. "Sarah, honey, you sound stronger than ever," said Miss Betty, a 75-year-old woman who had been singing in church choirs since she was 12. "Whatever you've been going through, it put some steel in your voice that wasn't there before." She was right about the steel. I could feel it in my posture, in the way I held my head when I walked down the street, in the firmness of my voice when I spoke. The woman who used to apologize for taking up space had been replaced by someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. The travel club turned out to be exactly what my spirit needed. Our first trip was to a historic plantation about 2 hours south, and I found myself sitting next to a woman named Grace, who had also recently extracted herself from what she called a financial vampire situation with her adult children. "Child, let me tell you something," Grace said as our bus rolled through the countryside. "The hardest lesson I ever learned was that some people will love you to death if you let them, but it ain't the kind of love that feeds your soul. It's the kind that drains your bank account and leaves you wondering why you feel so empty." Grace understood in a way that even Dorothy couldn't, having lived through the same awakening I was experiencing. She had supported her daughter and son-in-law for 8 years before finally recognizing that their love came with a price tag attached. When she stopped paying, they stopped calling, and she discovered that the silence was actually a blessing. "How long did it take before you stopped feeling guilty?" I asked her as we toured the old mansion, admiring the craftsmanship of people who had built something meant to last. About 6 months, she said honestly. 6 months of wondering if I was being too hard on them, if I should reach out and apologize for setting boundaries. Then one day I realized I hadn't thought about their problems in a whole week, and I felt lighter than I had in years. That's when I knew I made the right choice. Her words gave me hope that the occasional pangs of doubt I still felt would eventually fade completely. Some mornings I would wake up and automatically reach for my phone to check if Marcus had called, before remembering that I had chosen peace over chaos, dignity over desperation. The financial freedom was intoxicating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant drain of Marcus and Jessica's manufactured emergencies, my monthly budget had breathing room for the first time in years. I could buy good coffee instead of the store brand. I could replace my worn-out shoes without guilt. I could donate to the church building fund without calculating whether I would have enough left over for someone else's rent payment. But the real revelation came when I started looking at my retirement accounts and realized how much damage 3 years of constant giving had actually done. The financial advisor at my bank, Mr. Thompson, looked concerned when I brought in my statements for a comprehensive review. Mrs. Williams, I have to ask, were you aware that you had withdrawn nearly 60% of your retirement savings over the past 3 years? His voice was gentle but serious, like a doctor delivering difficult news. 60%. The number hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on helping with individual crises that I never stepped back to see the bigger picture of what my generosity was costing me. If I had continued at that pace for just 2 more years, I would have been facing poverty in my old age, dependent on the very people who had proven they only valued me for my money. Mr. Thompson, what would have happened if I had kept withdrawing money at that rate? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Mrs. Williams, you would have been completely depleted within 5 years. At that point, you would have been entirely dependent on Social Security, which wouldn't have been enough to maintain your current lifestyle. You would have needed assistance just to keep your house. The irony was staggering. In trying to help Marcus and Jessica build their future, I had been destroying my own. They would have bled me dry and then moved on to the next source of funding, leaving me destitute and alone in my old age. The very people I thought I was securing a relationship with would have abandoned me the moment I had nothing left to give. That evening, I sat in my garden as the sun set behind my rose bushes, feeling grateful for the first time in months, grateful that I had found the strength to stop the bleeding before it was too late, grateful that Jessica's cruelty about the wedding had opened my eyes to the truth about their feelings toward me, grateful that I still had time to build a life worth living instead of just existing to solve other people's problems. The phone rang around 8 o'clock, jarring me from my peaceful contemplation. It was Dorothy, calling with news that made my blood run cold. Sarah, honey, I got a call from Cousin Ruth in Memphis today. She said Marcus and some girl showed up at her house yesterday, asking for money to help with their rent. They told her you had cut them off financially, and they were desperate for help. My hands started shaking as the implications hit me. They weren't just looking for money from strangers Jessica sent my way. They were reaching out to my extended family, probably painting me as a cruel mother who had abandoned her son in his time of need. Ruth was my late husband's cousin, a sweet woman who barely knew Marcus, but would feel obligated to help family if she thought they were truly desperate. Did Ruth give them money? I asked, dreading the answer. She gave them $200, Sarah. She said that boy looked so pitiful, talking about how his mama had turned her back on him and his new wife. Ruth felt sorry for them. $200 from a woman on a fixed income who could barely afford her own medications. I felt sick thinking about Marcus manipulating my elderly relatives, using their love for me against them, to extract money for problems he and Jessica had created themselves. Dorothy, I need you to call Ruth back and tell her the whole story. Tell her about the wedding, about the $40,000, about everything. I don't want them taking advantage of any more of our family members. Already done, sister. Ruth was madder than a wet hen when I explained what really happened. She said if that boy shows up at her door again, she's calling the police for trespassing. But the damage was already done. Marcus and Jessica were now actively working to turn my family against me, spreading their version of events to anyone who might be willing to help them financially. They were painting me as the villain in their story, the cruel mother who had cut off her loving son without justification. The next morning brought confirmation that their campaign was wider than I had imagined. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door with a troubled expression, holding a piece of paper in her hand. Sarah, honey, I got the strangest phone call yesterday from someone claiming to be your daughter-in-law. She said you were having some kind of mental health crisis and asked if I had noticed any concerning behavior from you lately. Mental health crisis. They were now suggesting that my decision to stop funding their lifestyle was evidence of cognitive decline or emotional instability. The manipulation was so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that it took my breath away. What did you tell her? I asked, though I was pretty sure I could guess based on Mrs. Patterson's expression. I told her that you seemed happier and healthier than I'd seen you in years, and that anyone calling to gossip about their neighbors wasn't someone I wanted to talk to. Then I hung up on her. But Mrs. Patterson's loyalty couldn't protect me from what was clearly a coordinated effort to damage my reputation. If Jessica was calling my neighbors, she was probably calling other people, too. Church members, old friends, anyone who might be concerned enough about my supposed mental state to either give them money or pressure me to resume my financial support. The realization that they were actively working to destroy my relationships and my reputation filled me with a cold anger I hadn't felt since the day Jessica told me I wasn't important enough to attend their wedding. They weren't content to simply move on and find other sources of income. They wanted to punish me for daring to set boundaries, to make me pay for choosing my own well-being over their comfort. That afternoon, I called Mr. Weber, a lawyer I had known from church for years, and made an appointment to discuss my options. If Marcus and Jessica wanted to play dirty, I needed to understand what tools I had to protect myself. Mr. Weber's office was exactly what I expected from a man who had practiced law for 40 years. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and the kind of quiet dignity that comes from helping people solve their problems with wisdom instead of emotion. Sarah, I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you look more determined, he said, as I settled into the chair across from his desk. Tell me what's going on. I told him everything, from the 3 years of financial support, to the wedding exclusion, to the current campaign, to portray me as mentally unstable. Mr. Weber took notes, asked clarifying questions, and occasionally shook his head in what looked like professional disgust. Sarah, what you're describing is a textbook case of financial elder abuse, followed by a defamation campaign designed to either restore their access to your money or punish you for cutting them off. The good news is that you have legal options. The bad news is that using them will probably end any possibility of reconciliation with your son. Mr. Weber, that possibility ended the day they excluded me from the wedding after taking my money to pay for it. I'm not interested in reconciliation with people who see me as an ATM. I'm interested in protecting myself from further abuse. He smiled at that, the kind of smile that suggested he had been hoping I would say exactly those words. In that case, we have several tools at our disposal. First, I can send them a cease and desist letter, demanding they stop contacting your family and friends with false information about your mental state. Second, I can help you document all the money you gave them over the past 3 years in case we need to pursue legal remedies later. And third, I can help you put additional protections in place to prevent them from accessing your finances in the future. The idea of taking legal action against my own son should have felt devastating, but instead it felt empowering. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was moving from defense to offense, from reacting to their manipulation to actively protecting my interests. Let's do all three, I said, without hesitation. I'm done being a victim in this situation. Mr. Weber drafted the cease and desist letter that afternoon, and reading it gave me a satisfaction I hadn't expected. The legal language was clear and unambiguous. Marcus and Jessica were to immediately stop making false statements about my mental health, stop contacting my family and friends for money, and stop using my name or reputation to solicit financial assistance from anyone. Sarah, I'm also going to recommend that you consider changing your will, Mr. Weber said as he prepared to send the letter. Right now, if something happened to you, Marcus would inherit everything. Given their demonstrated attitude toward your money, you might want to consider other options. The thought of Marcus and Jessica profiting from my death after treating me so badly while I was alive was intolerable. What would you suggest? You could leave your estate to charity or to other family members, or you could set up a trust with conditions they would have to meet to access the money. The key is making sure your assets go to people or causes that actually align with your values. I left Mr. Weber's office feeling more in control of my situation than I had in months. The legal system might not be able to force Marcus and Jessica to treat me with respect, but it could prevent them from continuing to abuse me financially or damage my reputation with lies. The cease and desist letter was delivered the next day, and the response came faster than I expected. Instead of a call from Marcus or Jessica, I received a visit from Jessica's mother, Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman I had met exactly twice in the 3 years Marcus and Jessica had been together. She knocked on my door around dinner time, dressed in her work uniform and looking tired but determined. When I opened the door, she didn't wait for an invitation to speak. Mrs. Williams, I think we need to talk about our children. I invited her in, curious about what had brought Jessica's mother to my doorstep. We sat in my living room, two mothers dealing with the consequences of our adult children's choices, and, for the first time in this whole situation, I felt like I was talking to someone who might actually understand my position. Mrs. Williams, Jessica told me about the money situation, and I want you to know that her father and I had no idea how much you had been helping them. If we had known, we would have put a stop to it years ago. Her words surprised me. I had assumed Jessica's parents were aware of and supportive of their daughter's financial dependence on me. You didn't know? We knew Jessica wasn't working much, and we knew Marcus's job didn't pay great. But every time we asked how they were managing, they said they were fine. We had no idea they were living off your retirement savings. Mrs. Rodriguez looked genuinely upset, and I found myself feeling sorry for her. She was dealing with the same kind of betrayal I was, discovering that her daughter was not the person she thought she had raised. Mrs. Williams, I came here to apologize for my daughter's behavior and to ask you something. Would you be willing to help me understand what really happened? Jessica's version of events doesn't make sense, and I need to know the truth. So I told her everything. The 3 years of financial support, the wedding exclusion, the threats, the campaign to portray me as mentally unstable. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. Mrs. Williams, I am so sorry. I raised Jessica to be better than this. I don't know where we went wrong, but I want you to know that her father and I do not support what she's doing to you. That conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez was the turning point I didn't know I needed. Here was a mother willing to face the truth about her child's character, even when it hurt. We spent the evening sharing stories about raising children who disappointed us, about the guilt that comes with wondering if we somehow failed as mothers, and about the strength it takes to love someone while refusing to enable their bad behavior. Mrs. Rodriguez kept her word. She and her husband cut off all financial support to Marcus and Jessica, telling them they needed to learn to stand on their own feet like responsible adults. Within 2 weeks of that conversation, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Marcus and Jessica had been evicted from their apartment. They had moved in with one of Jessica's friends, sleeping on a couch, and finally experiencing the consequences of their financial irresponsibility. The important guests from their wedding, it turned out, were not so eager to help with rent money and grocery bills. Jessica's parents had their own bills to pay. Her siblings had their own families to support. The friends who had celebrated their love with champagne glasses suddenly became very busy when asked to contribute to their basic living expenses. 6 months later, I ran into Marcus at the grocery store. He looked tired, older somehow, wearing a uniform from a fast food restaurant I didn't recognize. Our eyes met across the produce section, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy I used to know. But when he started to approach me, I simply turned my cart around and walked away. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. I heard later that Jessica had gotten a job at a call center, working nights to make ends meet. The woman who had once considered me unimportant enough to exclude from her wedding was now discovering what it really meant to work for every dollar. They were learning lessons that my generosity had prevented them from learning years earlier. Today, my retirement accounts are healthy again. My days are filled with art classes, choir practice, and volunteer work that feeds my soul instead of draining my bank account. I've traveled to places I only dreamed about when I was busy funding other people's dreams. My house is quiet, but it's a peaceful quiet, not the anxious silence of waiting for the next financial crisis to solve. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting them off, if I miss having family around. The answer is simple. I didn't lose family when I stopped giving them money. I discovered I never had it in the first place. Real family doesn't come with a price tag, and real love doesn't disappear when the bank account closes. The most important lesson I learned is this: when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Don't spend years trying to buy their love, hoping your generosity will change their heart. Some people will take everything you have to give and still consider you unimportant. Choose yourself instead. Choose your dignity. Choose your peace. And to anyone listening who recognizes their own story and mine, remember this. It's never too late to close the bank that never should have opened. Your worth isn't measured by what you can give to others. It's measured by how much you value yourself. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them face the consequences of their choices without your money cushioning the fall. My name is Sarah. I'm 70 years old, and I finally learned that the most important person in my life is me.